I'm about to show you a quick hack that will perfect your hammer-on and pull-off technique. And I'm going to use my acoustic guitar here. That's not going to do me any favors to show you that this technique works. The main focus of this is to clean up the hammer-on and pull-off technique. Because when a lot of us are trying out this for the first time, because it's a new motion, right, and we're not used to it, we tend to do this kind of rapid-fire thing where we're not really putting a lot of force behind, the hammer-on or the pull-off, so it just kind of ends up sounding something like this. And that's perfectly okay in the beginning because, again, this is a new movement. This is not something you're going to nail the very first time. Pun intended, right? Hammer on, nail, get it? Okay, so what I'm going to show you with this technique, and it's going to be very, very simple. Okay, we're going to start with our first finger on the 5th fret of the high E string, right? And we're going to keep that there because again, with hammer-ons and pull-offs, as you know, it's going to take 2 notes, right? Because you're going back and forth between 2 notes usually. So taking our first finger on the 5th fret of the high E string here, what we're going to do is we're going to take our second finger, right? And we're going to do the actual hammer-on part. Because remember, it's 2 different things. Hammer-on, pull-off. It's not kind of one blurred motion, which is what we naturally tend to do. At least I did when I was first trying this technique out, right? So really, this is a very simple thing we're trying to do, is to just compartmentalize each movement, right? The hammer-on is one decisive movement. The pull-off is one decisive movement. So in order to get good at either one, we need to focus on them individually. So if we're going to start with the hammer-on, right? So when we play the 5th fret of the high E string, while that note is sustaining, what we want to do is we want to allow that the string to continue ringing by the force of our finger hitting the next fret, like this. Right? Now I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you can kind of hear the impact of my finger on the fretboard there because it's literally like the name suggests, right? You're treating your finger like it's a hammer and it's one decisive motion, right? Don't worry about releasing the note. Don't worry about the pull-offs yet, just one at a time, okay? Very, very simple little analysis we're doing with this, right? So with just the hammer-on, we hammer on from, we play the 5th fret of the high E string, hammer on to the 6th fret. Now, of course, you want to use the very, very tip of your finger. See, when you're hammering on like this, it's kind of, I'm more used to it because I did it a lot and I've obviously developed some calluses and can kind of still register a note there, but it's really not the way to go. You want to use the very tip of your finger because we're trying to utilize as little of like the actual flesh of our finger as possible. So you really want to think of your finger like it's the tip of a hammer, right? Just you're only using what you need to get the job done, okay? Now, once we've, done that a few times between the 5th fret and the 6th fret here, now we're going to take our 3rd finger. So we're going to just kind of go through each of these fingers with working this technique, right? And we're only focusing on hammer-ons right now. So we're going, so once we do that motion, we're not pulling off, we're not doing this yet, all right? We're not doing that yet. We're just doing the hammer-on, stopping it, right? Then we do the same thing, and we're keeping our first finger here on the 5th fret of the high E string. We're going to hammer on to the 7th fret here with our 3rd finger. All right, remember, hammer, 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 hammer. So as another great little exercise, or just to kind of warm your fingers up to the motion, you can just not pick the string, just kind of mute it, and then just do this. Make sure you can actually hear, like don't just kind of blindly whack at it, just like really as if you're seriously trying to get that hammer on, right? It helps, especially on acoustic, because you can just hear that like thud, right, of like hitting the fretboard there. And in the beginning, it actually doesn't hurt to exaggerate a little bit, just to put some oomph behind it, right? Because once you start to get, comfortable with it, your hand can be a little bit more relaxed, but you're still applying the same amount of force. It's like being like Bruce Lee, you're like water, right? You're just like relaxed, but applying that force when you need it. All right, and then of course you can pick the note to test that you're doing the technique correctly and sustaining the note. All right, so remember, we're just picking once, and then that hammer is supposed to sustain the note, right? If we lose the sound, right, then we didn't do it right. We want to try again. Okay, so you're getting the idea here. And then we can do the same thing with our pinky. So keeping our first finger on the 5th fret of the high E string, then with our pinky, we can hammer on right there the 8th fret. Right? Remember, just hammer-ons. So for this whole little exercise, we're just going from like 5 to 6, and then 5 to 7, and then 5 to 8. And you want to listen for an evenness, right, in the attack, right, of each hammer-on. If you notice that one finger seems a little bit weaker, a lot of times it's the pinky, right? Because the pinky is like the last pick of the dodgeball team, right? We don't use it as often as we use the other fingers, but it's a very important finger, right? And we want it to be on the same like playability, the same level as the rest of the fingers. So if you find that your pinky, for example, is the most problematic, doesn't give you the most sustain, right? Then you can really focus on that finger, right? Oh. And so we just do that over and over again, right? And then you can walk your way back, right? Nothing musical about this exercise. It's literally meant to just build that technique in your fingers. And now let's talk about the pull-offs. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is a little bit different. So we're gonna get to a point where we're doing both simultaneously, but again, we're compartmentalizing. It's the whole nature of this little hack, is to literally just focus on each move individually as a decisive movement, and then bringing it all together at the end, okay? So in this case, we're doing our first pull-off, right? We gotta start with the higher note because we pull off to a lower note. That's how it works. So we're gonna have our second finger here on the 6th fret of the high E string, and we're going to pull off to the 5th fret. We're keeping our first finger on the 5th fret. We're keeping that fret there, right? Or that finger fretted. So we're gonna pick the note, and see, the reason it's called a pull off is because you're not just releasing your finger, because what that tends to do is you actually lose a lot of sustain when you do that, right? But if you actually kind of pull the string, I'm talking ever so slightly pulling that string on the way out of that pull off there, right? Now, to exaggerate, you can see how I'm just slightly pulling the string, not enough to actually bend the pitch. You don't want to do that, but right, it's too much exaggeration there. All right, but notice how the sustain is still there. Okay, so we're pulling off from 6 to 5 here, and then if you're still hearing the note ringing out, you're doing it right. All right, and picking it hard doesn't hurt, because then you're getting more force behind the string, therefore more sustain. All right, and then we're doing the same thing starting from the 7th fret here on the high E string, pulling off to 5, right? And it's okay to exaggerate a little bit, right? Again, just to focus on the oomph, the power of it, because it does require a little bit of power, but just enough. When we're first doing this, you know, we don't really have a control or regulation over the power or lack thereof that we put into it. So when you think of it as a decisive motion and you figure out how to put just the right amount of power behind it, that's how you achieve a perfect hammer-on and a perfect pull-off, right? And then we're doing the same thing, right, from the 8th fret of the high E string, pulling off to 5, right? So you're just slightly pulling the string on the way out. Now, that's gonna take a little bit of time to figure out where that sweet spot is in terms of how much you're bending the string or how much you're pulling off of it, okay? This is something that for me, it is incredibly momentary, like little pull, and it just allows me to almost like give the string a second wind, right? So that sustain really comes out, okay? And then we just work our way forward and backwards with it. So we're going, just like that. And once you practice these through a few times individually, right, the hammer-ons individually and the pull-offs individually, the third part is to bring it all together. So what we're gonna do is, starting on the 5th fret of the high E string, right, just like we were, we're gonna be doing what's called a trill. So it's essentially a back and forth between two notes, and we're gonna be using the hammer-on and pull-off technique. So if we're gonna do a little trill between the 5th and the 6th fret, for example, it'll look like this. So notice how I picked the string once, but while I was trilling, I was essentially infinitely sustaining the strings, or the string. So even though the sustain just kind of gradually gets like, you know, less and less loud, I'm pretty much able to keep, you know, sound going indefinitely because of that motion, right? Of just going back and forth. And it's because I'm focusing individually on the hammer-on, then the pull-off, not a blurred motion of both, right? So we do the hammer-on, and you want to do this slow, right? One at a time. So hammer-on, right? And then pull-off. And you can do the trill however many times you want. But I strongly suggest that you do the trill slow at first, right? Think to yourself, hammer, pull, hammer, pull, hammer, pull, right? And, don't worry about doing this. Start off just really, getting down the individuality of each move, making it decisive, having the right amount of force, sustaining the note, all that, right? And then you can gradually increase the speed so that when it comes to the point where you're ready to trill like Brian May, then it's gonna be nice and sustained and it's not gonna lose steam, So that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna trill between each of these notes, just like what we've been doing, starting between the 5th and the 6th fret, right? And then we'll do 5th and 7th fret. Oh. All right, and then 5th and 8th fret. And again, figure out which finger, you can almost rank your fingers in terms of which have the stronger hammer-ons and pull-offs and which are the weaker, right? And then you can accordingly practice and make sure that you get those weaker fingers, up in their strength so that you can have all the fingers on the same level playing field, which is what you want at the end of the day. So you've just been given a powerful exercise for your practice sessions that will perfect your hammer-on and pull-off technique. And just so you know, every single exercise, pretty much everything that I teach on this channel is stuff that I personally use. There's not a single exercise that I've ever taught that I no longer do because I'm somehow above it, because I've leveled up, right? That's not the case at all. In fact, these are exercises to maintain regardless of what level you're at. And as you continue to grow as a guitar player, you want to continue with these exercises. You just kind of get better at them. So the exercises never really lose their efficiency and their power, right, in getting you to be a better guitar player. And speaking of practice sessions, there's something I want you to have. It's a free practice session cheat sheet. This has shown thousands of guitar players exactly what to do when you practice so that you get the maximum results in the minimum amount of time possible. So be sure to click here to claim that or check the link in the description box. And if you enjoyed this lesson, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. And be sure to check out our other relevant lessons right over here. I want to thank you for hanging out with me today, and I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. I'm Eddie Haddad with Guitar Mastery Method, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.